Hey everyone, and welcome. Have you ever been driving and just looked at a massive bridge and thought, how in the world did they build that? Well, today we're taking that question to the extreme. We're talking about building highways in the sky, spanning gorges so deep the road literally floats above a sea of clouds. It's all about the engineering genius that takes one look at the word impossible and gets to work.
I mean, seriously, just think about that question. It really does sound like something out of science fiction, right? But for some of the most brilliant engineers on the planet, in places like France and China, this wasn't a movie plot. It was a very real, very monumental challenge. We're not just talking about crossing a river here. We're talking about defying gravity and geography on a scale that is honestly hard to wrap your head around.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the epic problem these bridges solve in the first place. Then we'll dive into the two main ways engineers think about spanning these massive gaps. We'll get into two incredible case studies, the Miao Viaduct and the Huajian Canyon Bridge. After that, we'll uncover some of the invisible forces that these structures have to fight every single day. And finally, we'll look at the amazing impact they have on the real world.
All right, so first up, crossing the impossible gorge. Before we get into the how, we got to understand the why. Why on earth would anyone go to all this trouble, spend all this money, and dedicate years of their lives to this? Well, the answer lies in valleys so deep and so wide, they basically act like giant walls, cutting off entire communities and paralyzing travel.
Just imagine this. Before 2004, if you were driving from Paris down to Spain, the main highway would just end. You had no choice but to snake your way down a winding road into this super deep valley, get stuck crawling through the little town of Milou, and then climb all the way back up the other side. In the summer? Forget about it. People were stuck in traffic for 6 hours. It was a total nightmare that basically strangled the whole region.
Okay, so to solve a problem like that, engineers have two main tricks up their sleeves. Two big ideas for these super long bridges. Now, to you and me, they might look kind of similar, but underneath, they are two completely different philosophies for fighting that one constant enemy, gravity.
And you can see the difference so clearly with this analogy. On one hand, you have the suspension bridge, which is basically a giant hammock. The road just hangs there, suspended from these enormous main cables that are draped over the towers. On the other hand, you've got the cable-stayed bridge. This one is more like a giant harp or a fan. You see how the cables go directly from the tower down to the road deck? They're pulling it up with pure, straight-angled tension.
So let's zoom in on a suspension bridge for a sec. All that weight, the road, the cars, everything, gets pulled up to those two huge main cables. Those cables are under incredible tension, and they're trying to pull the two ends of the bridge together. So where does all that force go? It has to go somewhere, right? Well, it gets channeled into these gigantic anchorages, often just massive blocks of concrete buried deep in the bedrock. It's a huge undertaking, but it's what makes them perfect for spanning the absolute longest distances on the planet.
Now, the cable-stayed design, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a much more self-contained system. Here, the towers are doing the heavy lifting, taking the load and compression. They're being squeezed. All the pulling forces from the cables on one side of the tower are perfectly balanced out by the cables on the other side. And here's the key takeaway. Because everything's balanced at the tower, you don't need those huge anchorages dug into the ground. This makes the whole structure incredibly stiff and super stable.
So with those two big ideas in our heads, let's see one of them in action. We're heading to Millau, France, to look at an absolute masterpiece of cable-stayed engineering. For 20 years, this was the tallest bridge in the entire world. Let that number sink in. 343 meters. That is taller than the Eiffel Tower. It's so high that on some mornings, when the fog settles in the valley below, you are literally driving your car above a sea of clouds. It is just a breathtaking example of what the cable-stayed design can do, and building it pushed modern engineering to its absolute limits.
So how on earth did they do it? You can think of it in 4 major acts. First, they had to drill deep into the ground, which was unstable and full of caves, to create solid foundations. Then, they built 7 colossal concrete piers up from the valley floor. But here's the mind-blowing part, the road itself. That 36,000-ton steel deck wasn't lifted into place. No way. It was built on land on both sides of the valley and then slowly, inch by inch, pushed out over the piers using a super smart system of hydraulic jacks. Once it met in the middle, they put the steel pylons on top and attached all the cables, locking the whole thing together.
I absolutely love this quote from the architect Sir Norman Foster, because even though this thing is a monster of engineering, he wanted it to feel light, delicate. He wanted it to touch the landscape as gently as possible. Just 7 slender piers and a thin ribbon of road. A butterfly, not a bulldozer. And that wasn't just for looks, you know. That delicate, open design is also incredibly smart engineering because it helps the powerful winds of the Tarn Valley flow right through it instead of pushing against it.
But hey, records are made to be broken, right? So now we're going to jump over to Guizhou province in China, which has some of the most insanely rugged terrain on Earth. It's home to the new highest bridge in the world, the Huazhang Canyon Bridge.
625 meters. That's not to the top of the tower. That's the distance from the road you drive on, straight down to the river below. It is so ridiculously high that they've actually built tourist centers and viewing platforms on top of the towers. And get this, during construction, the only way to get to those spots was by helicopter. This thing isn't just a bridge, it's a skyscraper that you can drive across.
So why didn't they build another beautiful cable-stayed bridge here? Well, the problem was that V-shaped canyon. It was just too wide. We're talking over 1,400 meters across. The math for a cable-stayed bridge or any other design just didn't work. It would collapse under its own weight. There was only one way to make that enormous leap, and that was with the one design built for these kinds of insane distances, the suspension bridge. And the process here was just as wild. The towers were built directly onto the steep mountainsides. The main cables, each one weighing an unbelievable 9,000 tons, weren't just anchored in the ground, they were anchored deep inside the mountains themselves. And in a really cool modern twist, to get the very first line across that huge chasm, they used drones to pull it over. After that, it was a slow, careful process of hoisting 93 massive sections of the road up from the valley floor and hanging them in midair.
Okay, so putting these things up is obviously a massive achievement. But making sure they stay up for 100 years or more, that's a whole different challenge. It means you have to become a master of all these invisible, but incredibly powerful forces of nature.
A bridge like this is in a constant battle. It's not just fighting gravity. It has to deal with the steel physically growing in the summer heat and shrinking in the winter cold. It has to withstand winds that can whip through these canyons like a hurricane. It has to endure the constant vibration of traffic and even the threat of earthquakes. Every single one of these forces has to be calculated with a precision that is just staggering.
You really have to think of these bridges as living, breathing things. On a hot summer day, that huge steel road deck at Millau actually gets longer, and on a cold winter night, it shrinks. We're talking about a difference of up to 100 millimeters, or about 4 inches. If engineers didn't build in these special expansion joints that give the bridge room to breathe, it would literally tear itself apart from the stress.
And this is where the real artistry of engineering comes in. That analogy of tuning a giant guitar is perfect. Every time you tighten a new cable, it changes the tension on all the other cables. It's a delicate balancing act. You have to get the tension right to within 1% of your target. Why? Because the goal is to get those 2 giant halves of the bridge, meeting in the middle of a massive gorge, to line up perfectly. We're talking within 2 millimeters. It's just incredible.
But at the end of the day, these things are so much more than just amazing feats of concrete and steel. They're not just about breaking records. They are genuine lifelines that can completely reshape the world for the people who live near them.
I mean, just look at this. This chart says it all. Before this bridge existed, if you wanted to get across the Hengjiang Canyon, it was a dangerous, winding 70-minute drive. After this bridge opens, that exact same journey will take 60 seconds. 1 minute. That's not just making life a little easier, that is a fundamental transformation of time and space for an entire community.
And that 1 minute of travel time creates ripples that spread out everywhere. Suddenly, remote villages have real access to city hospitals and schools. New trade routes open up, and local economies flourish. And of course, the bridges themselves become tourist attractions, creating whole new industries. They really are so much more than just a way to get from A to B. They're symbols of pure human ambition.
So, from the holiday traffic jams in France to the isolated deep canyons of China, these incredible structures show us what happens when we refuse to accept the limits of our geography. We don't just move mountains, we fly right over them. They completely redefine the boundaries of our world. And that just leaves us with one last, really exciting question. What impossible challenge are we going to conquer next?